My landlord tried to illegally evict me, so I bought his building and evicted him instead. It started when Marcus raised my rent 40% with 2 weeks' notice. I'd been renting the same studio apartment for 3 years, always paid on time, never caused problems. The building was a dump, peeling paint, broken elevator, heat that worked maybe half the winter. But it was affordable at $800 a month, and I was saving every penny for my master's degree in social work. Market rates, Marcus said when I called to protest. His voice had that smugness of someone who'd had this conversation 100 times before. In the background, I could hear a TV blaring some talk show and what sounded like a woman crying. I can't afford $120, I said. And 2 weeks isn't legal notice. Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that made my skin crawl. Legal notice? Kid, this is my building. I can do whatever I want. You don't like it, there's the door. Good luck finding another place you can afford in this neighborhood. He paused, and I could hear him taking a drink of something. Besides, I know you college kids. Probably got rich parents anyway. Time to stop playing poor and ask daddy for money. I wanted to tell him that my parents had died in a car accident when I was 16, that I'd been working 2 jobs since high school just to survive. Instead, I hung up and started researching. I researched tenant laws all night, printing statutes and highlighting violations. Rent increases required 30 days notice and couldn't exceed 25% annually in our city. Late fees couldn't exceed 5% of monthly rent. Landlords couldn't enter units without 24-hour notice except for emergencies. What Marcus was doing violated at least 6 different housing codes. At 8 a.m., I knocked on his penthouse door, the only unit he'd actually maintained. Through the doorway, I could see granite countertops and hardwood floors that gleamed. His coffee mug said, "World's Best Landlord" in Comic Sans font. Behind him, a woman in a silk robe was cooking eggs on a stainless steel stove. He barely glanced at my legal documents. "Sue me," he laughed. "You think some broke college kid can afford a lawyer? I've been doing this for 20 years. Half my tenants don't even speak English well enough to fight back." He leaned against his doorframe, sizing me up like a predator evaluating prey. The woman behind him stopped cooking and watched our conversation with interest. "Besides, maybe try the suburbs. I hear there's a lovely trailer park about an hour away. More your speed." The woman, his wife, I assumed, giggled at this. She had the kind of laugh that suggested she'd never worried about rent in her life. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. I started talking to other tenants that same day. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman on the 2nd floor, showed me notices demanding she pay $800 in cleaning fees or face eviction. Her English was limited, but her fear was universal. She'd been living there for 8 years, never missed a payment. "He says my apartment dirty," she explained, showing me photos she'd taken. "But I clean every day." I show him. "Is clean." He says no, must pay or leave. The photos showed an immaculate apartment. Mrs. Chen had covered every surface with protective plastic, the way my grandmother used to do. The Ramirez family had been charged $1,200 for excessive utilities when their toddler got sick and they ran a humidifier for 2 weeks. They couldn't afford the fee, so Marcus had filed eviction papers. "He says we use too much electricity," Maria Ramirez explained, bouncing her feverish daughter Sophia. "But the baby, she needs the machine to breathe properly. Doctor says so." She showed me their utility bills. The increase was $23 for the month. I knocked on every door in the building. 24 units, 18 different horror stories. Marcus was systematically targeting vulnerable tenants, gambling they wouldn't know their rights or couldn't afford to fight back. The Johnsons in 3A had been charged $600 for noise violations because their newborn cried at night. The Ahmed family faced eviction for unauthorized guests when their elderly father visited for a week. College students were charged party fees for having friends over to study. The pattern was always the same: impossible demands, illegal fees, threats made to tenants who barely understood their rights. Anyone who pushed back got evicted for lease violations that didn't exist. I started keeping a detailed log. Every conversation, every bogus charge, every tenant too scared to fight back. I took photos of the crumbling hallways, the broken mailboxes, the elevator that hadn't worked in 6 months, the mold growing around the windows that Marcus refused to address. The city housing department had fined him $15,000 last year for code violations. He'd paid the minimum and changed nothing. I discovered Marcus owned 4 other buildings in the neighborhood, all run the same way. His total property value was over $3 million, but he spent nothing on maintenance and everything on intimidation. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when I saw Marcus screaming at Mrs. Chen in the hallway, demanding she sign papers she couldn't read. "Just sign here, Grandma," he said, shoving a pen at her shaking hands. "Makes everything easier. No lawyers, no courts, no trouble for anybody." Mrs. Chen was crying, repeating, I pay rent," in broken English. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. I stepped between them. "Those are eviction papers," I told her in the little Mandarin I'd learned from a college roommate. "Don't sign anything." Mrs. Chen's eyes widened with relief. She'd understood more than she'd let on. Marcus's face turned red. Up close, I could smell alcohol on his breath at 10 a.m. "Mind your own business or you're next." "Actually, this is my business," I said. "I live here. And what you're doing is illegal." He grabbed my arm, hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises that I photographed later. You think you're smart? I'll have you out by Friday. Drug possession, noise complaints, property damage. I'll make up whatever I need to. I know judges in this city. They don't care about punks like you. That night, I called my grandfather. Pop had been a contractor for 40 years before retiring wealthy. He'd built half the subdivisions in our county, invested wisely in real estate, and most importantly, taught me how predators operate in business. How much would it cost to buy Marcus's building? I asked. Pop was quiet for a long moment. In the background, I could hear him clicking around on his computer, probably pulling up property records. Why? He asked finally. I explained everything. The illegal evictions, the fake charges, how Marcus targeted people who couldn't fight back, how he'd threatened to frame me for drug possession, and bragged about having judges in his pocket. Send me the property records, Pop said. And that log you've been keeping. Let's see what we're working with. 2 days later, Pop called back with information that changed everything. Building's worth about $800,000, but Marcus owes $650,000 on the mortgage. He's been missing payments for 3 months. Bank's getting ready to foreclose. He paused, and I could hear papers shuffling. Here's the interesting part. He took out a second mortgage last year to buy a vacation home in Florida. Used the building as collateral. He's leveraged to the hilt and hemorrhaging money. So he's desperate, I said. Exactly. That's why he's squeezing tenants so hard. He needs cash flow to avoid losing everything. Pop was quiet for another moment. I've got enough liquid capital to buy it cash at auction. Want to be my property manager? The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Pop would buy the building at foreclosure auction, then we'd clean house properly. But first, we needed Marcus to hang himself with his own rope. I installed a hidden camera in my apartment and started baiting him. Every interaction was recorded. When he demanded I pay $500 for excessive wear and tear on a carpet that was already stained when I moved in, I got it on video. This carpet was perfect when you moved in, he lied directly to the camera. Now look at it. These stains are going to cost me thousands to fix. The carpet had cigarette burns and wine stains that were older than my lease. When he tried to enter my apartment without notice, illegal in our state, I caught that too. He claimed he was inspecting for lease violations. But really, he was looking for anything he could use against me. College kids always have drugs, he muttered to himself, not realizing my camera was recording. Just got to find where she hides them. The masterpiece came when I casually mentioned I'd spoken to other tenants about their rent increases. You've been organizing? He snarled. That's harassment of other tenants. Lease violation, you're out. He actually tried to serve me with eviction papers for talking to my neighbors. The papers cited community agitation as grounds for immediate eviction. I showed the papers to a tenant rights lawyer who laughed so hard she nearly fell off her chair. This isn't legally binding toilet paper, she said. He might as well have written it in crayon. But the papers served my purpose. More evidence of Marcus's illegal harassment tactics. 2 weeks later, Pop and I sat in the courthouse as Marcus's building went to auction. He'd missed 4 mortgage payments and the bank was done waiting. The foreclosure notice had been posted on the building for 30 days, giving Marcus plenty of time to arrange financing. Marcus showed up 5 minutes before the auction started, looking panicked. He wore a rumpled suit and kept checking his phone, probably trying to arrange emergency financing. His wife wasn't with him. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced. Multi-unit residential building, 1247 Oak Street. 24 units, built 1987, current assessed value $825,000. Opening bid starts at $650,000. Pop raised his paddle calmly. $650,000. Marcus shot up from his seat like he'd been electrocuted. $655,000. His voice cracked on the numbers. Other bidders looked at him with mixture of pity and annoyance. Pop didn't even hesitate. $700,000. I watched Marcus's face go white. He whispered frantically into his phone, then looked up with desperate eyes. $705,000. The auctioneer looked around the room. Most foreclosure auctions had limited bidding. Banks just wanted to recoup their losses. $750,000, Pop said calmly, as if he was ordering coffee. That was it. Marcus slumped back in his chair, defeated. He didn't have another $750,000. Neither did anyone else in that room willing to bid on a building that needed significant repairs. Going once, going twice. Marcus made one last desperate attempt, standing up and shouting, "Wait! I can get the money. I just need more time." The auctioneer ignored him. Sold to Paddle 23 for $750,000. Pop owned the building. Marcus sat frozen in his chair as people filed out around him. When he finally looked up and saw me standing there, the recognition hit him like a physical blow. "You," he whispered. "Hello, Marcus," I said pleasantly. "Fancy meeting you here." He stood up slowly, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and dawning comprehension. "This was planned. You planned this." "I documented your illegal activities," I corrected. "Your financial problems were already public record. We just took advantage of your poor business decisions." Pop walked over, having finished the paperwork. "Marcus, I presume. I'm the new owner. We'll need to discuss your lease situation." Marcus's face went through several colors. "My lease? I owned. You were a tenant with a lease agreement, Pop said mildly. A lease agreement that includes several clauses about property management fees and violation procedures, clauses you wrote yourself. The eviction process took exactly 30 days, the legal minimum. We filed papers citing Marcus's lease violations for entering my apartment without permission, plus non-payment of the management fees he suddenly owed as of the property transfer. Marcus tried to fight it, of course. He hired a lawyer and claimed we couldn't evict him from his own building. The lawyer took his $5,000 retainer and then explained the reality. Actually, the lawyer told him, you're not the owner anymore. And your lease agreement, which you wrote, clearly states that property management fees are due within 15 days of any ownership change. Marcus had written that clause to screw tenants if he ever sold. The fee was $2,000 per month, backdated to the ownership transfer. He owed $4,000 immediately. That's insane, Marcus protested. No one charges management fees to the owner. You're not the owner, the lawyer repeated patiently. You're a tenant. And according to your own lease terms, failure to pay management fees within 15 days constitutes grounds for immediate eviction. Marcus had created his own trap. During the eviction proceedings, more of his illegal activities came to light. The city housing inspector, investigating complaints from other buildings Marcus owned, found evidence of systematic fraud. Fake invoices for repairs never made, security deposits never returned, rent collected from units he'd already evicted people from. The state attorney general opened a criminal investigation. On eviction day, I stood in the hallway with the sheriff as Marcus packed his belongings. He kept muttering about how this wasn't fair, how we'd stolen his property, how he was going to sue everyone involved. Just business, I said, echoing his words from months earlier. Nothing personal. His belongings fit into surprisingly few boxes. For all his wealth, Marcus didn't seem to own much beyond expensive clothes and electronics. As he dragged his suitcases past Mrs. Chen's door, she opened it and smiled at him. Goodbye, Mr. Marcus, she said in perfect English. Good luck finding affordable housing. Marcus stopped dead. Your English has always been fine, Mrs. Chen said pleasantly. I just pretended otherwise to avoid your harassment. Amazing what people will say when they think you don't understand. Turns out, half the non-English speaking tenants Marcus had been bullying understood every word. They'd been documenting his threats and illegal demands for months, just waiting for someone to help them fight back. The building transformation took 6 months and $200,000 in renovations. Pop and I hired contractors to install new elevators, repair the heating system, update the electrical, and address all the safety violations Marcus had ignored. We hired tenants to help with the work and paid them fair wages. Maria Ramirez, who had restaurant management experience, coordinated the project. The Ahmed family's teenage son, who was studying electrical engineering, worked with our electricians and learned valuable skills. Rent actually went down for most units once we calculated fair market value based on the building's actual condition and amenities. Mrs. Chen's rent dropped to $600. The Ramirez family paid $850 for a 2-bedroom that Marcus had been charging $1,200 for. We instituted a tenant bill of rights, translated into 5 languages. Rent increases were capped at 3% annually. 24-hour maintenance response was guaranteed. Tenants could form committees to address building issues. Maria Ramirez became our building manager at $18 an hour plus benefits. Mrs. Chen started a community garden on the roof that she'd been dreaming about for years. The Nguyen family opened a small convenience store in the ground floor retail space we'd renovated. The other tenants we'd helped started spreading the word. Soon, tenants from Marcus's other buildings were calling, asking for help with their own situations. Pop and I formed a property management company specializing in tenant rights and affordable housing. We bought 2 more buildings that were facing foreclosure due to slumlord practices. 6 months after the eviction, I saw Marcus at a coffee shop downtown. He was sitting alone, telling someone on the phone about how he'd been cheated out of his property by some rich kid's grandfather. I walked over to his table. Hi, Marcus. How's the apartment hunting going? His face went red, just like old times. The person on the phone was still talking, but Marcus had gone silent. You destroyed my life, he hissed after hanging up. No, I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited. You destroyed your own life. I just gave you the same treatment you gave everyone else. He looked older than I remembered. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes or the way his hands shook slightly. I'm ruined, he said quietly. The criminal charges, the civil lawsuits, the bankruptcy. I lost everything. Mrs. Chen lost her sense of security for 8 years, I said. The Ramirez family nearly lost their daughter's medical equipment. You were ruining lives long before anyone touched yours. I pulled out a business card. My new property management company. We're always looking for good tenants if you can pass the background check. No evictions, clean credit, proof of income. You know how it works. Marcus stared at the card, then at me. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Though I should mention, we have a strict policy about rent increases. 30 days notice, reasonable amounts only. Market rate, you understand. He crumpled the card. I'd rather live in my car. That's your choice, I said. But if you change your mind, we don't discriminate based on past mistakes. Everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they're willing to follow the rules. I stood to leave, then turned back. Oh, and Marcus? That coffee shop you're sitting in? We just bought the building. Nothing's changing for the business, but we're converting the upstairs into affordable apartments. Rent starts at $750 for a one-bedroom. His face went white. 2 years later, our property management company oversees 12 buildings and houses over 300 families. We specialize in tenant rights, affordable housing, and rehabilitation of properties damaged by slumlords. Every lease includes a tenant bill of rights in 5 languages. We maintain an emergency fund to help tenants facing unexpected hardships. Our maintenance response time averages under 4 hours. Mrs. Chen still lives in 2B, but now she has a dishwasher, central air, and a thriving rooftop garden that supplies fresh vegetables to half the building. The Ramirez family owns their unit through a rent-to-own agreement we helped them secure. Maria manages 3 buildings now and just bought her first house with the money she's saved. The Ahmed family's son graduated with an electrical engineering degree and works for the city's housing department, inspecting buildings like the one he grew up in. Marcus never applied to be our tenant. Last I heard, he was renting a studio apartment in the suburbs for $900 a month, more than Mrs. Chen pays for her renovated one-bedroom downtown. His wife divorced him during the bankruptcy proceedings and moved back to her parents' house in California. The vacation home in Florida was seized by creditors. The criminal charges resulted in 2 years probation and $50,000 in restitution to former tenants. He's barred from owning rental property for 10 years. Sometimes I wonder if he learned anything from losing everything. But then I remember the look in Mrs. Chen's eyes when she thought she was going to be homeless, or Sofia Ramirez struggling to breathe while her parents chose between her medical equipment and rent money. Some people create suffering because they can. Others create solutions because they must. The building at 1247 Oak Street is full now, with a waiting list 3 months long. The hallways smell like Mrs. Chen's cooking, and the laughter of children who feel safe in their homes. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something better from the ashes of what someone else burned down, and making sure the people who were hurt get to help light the way forward. The last time I walked through those renovated hallways, I found a note Mrs. Chen had slipped under my office door. It was written in her careful handwriting. "Thank you for teaching old woman that sometimes the young ones fight back." But she had it backwards. She and the other tenants had taught me that sometimes fighting back isn't about anger. It's about refusing to let cruelty be the only voice in the room. Marcus had been wrong about a lot of things, but especially this. The people he thought were powerless had just been waiting for someone to remind them how strong they really were.